This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 10 of Here's How. On this show, we'll have two German views on the Greek debt crisis, including German MP Klaus-Peter Wilsch. We'll talk about the role of technology in government. We'll talk about the role of philanthropists in democracy, and much more.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
Long-term economic value. Remember that? The phrase long-term economic value was all over the news in 2010, about the time of the banking bailout. Economists and politicians and pundits would come on television and talk about the long-term economic value of the assets behind the loan books that the taxpayer was buying for billions of euro from the banks. They even got to using the shorthand, the initials LTEV, to stand for long-term economic value. It got to a point where discussion programs would talk about LTEV without even feeling the need to explain what the initials stood for. This was about the time that we all learnt about bondholders and sovereign debt and a whole dictionary of other vocabulary that we wish we had never had to learn about. In buying out the distressed assets of the banks, we would need to calculate what to pay, and what we would pay would be the long-term economic value. Nobody really explained what that was or how it would be calculated, but there was vague talk about it being some measure of what the asset was worth over the long term. Any farmer in Ireland can tell you what something is worth. If you're trying to sell a cow or a field or an office block for that matter, it's worth what two people are willing to pay for it. A price that only one buyer is willing to pay isn't any good, because that buyer would only need to bid enough to put the other buyer out of the sale. And of course, basic logic dictates that the more stuff there is being sold, the lower the price will go, and the more people buying, the higher the price will go. Supply and demand. But all those politicians and economists and pundits were eager to portray LTEV as another legitimate way of pricing an asset that clever politicians and economists and pundits would use to strike a fair deal when those assets were being bought from the banks. Google can tell you lots. You can do a basic search, but there are lots of other little tools in there as well. For example, you can search for web pages within a specific date range. I've put some examples of searches like that on the web page for this podcast. And if you set Google to search for LTEV, but only search for pages before 2009, guess what? You get nothing. 0 hits. Search for the phrase long-term economic value and you get basically the same result. Neither of them were mentioned on any document anywhere until they were mentioned in reference to NAMA buying bank assets at above their market price. Those clever politicians and economists and pundits basically pulled that concept out of the air. They just made it up, despite the fact that they had it tripping off their tongue as though it was a well-established concept in political economy. Now, it's true that anyone selling a property, let alone a large property portfolio in that period, would have taken a huge hit. The banks were private institutions, they had made bad investments, and they had to liquidate assets, so they were going to lose big. So why were politicians and economists and pundits dreaming up a new concept to justify the taxpayer paying over the market rate? Well, they told us why. They said it was to have the property sold off in an orderly fashion, not to all hit the market in one go, crashing the value of everything being sold. Remember the talk of the cheapest bailout in history? That was said on the basis that, although NAMA was overpaying for those assets, it was still paying less than the peak price, and that eventually it would sell those assets back into the market, bit by bit, and recoup that money for the taxpayer. It was much better for all those assets not to hit the market together at a time when there were very few buyers. So how's that going? Mick Wallace, the Wexford Independent TD, has made allegations of very serious corruption around NAMA deals. Some of the allegations have been denied, but Mick Wallace certainly seems to be onto something. One of his allegations was that £7 million sterling was paid in relation to the sale of NAMA's Northern Ireland property portfolio. That portfolio, a huge list of properties, was sold to the American private equity firm Cerberus. Cerberus paid €1.5 billion for €4.5 billion worth of property. They paid 1/3 of what it was worth. The taxpayer lost €3 billion. And the law firm involved parted company with one of their senior lawyers. This was the law firm acting on behalf of Cerberus. One of their lawyers admits that he left the firm in connection to him holding £7 million sterling from Cerberus in his personal Isle of Man account. The lawyer involved, a guy called Ian Coulter, says that this money was not a bribe for a senior politician, as Mick Wallace alleges. He says he put it in the Isle of Man account for complex legal reasons. Now that's not me interpreting what he said, those are his actual words. He says he did it for complex legal reasons, but he doesn't tell us what the complex legal reasons are. He's such a clever lawyer that he doesn't want us to bother our pretty little heads trying to understand complex legal reasons. But let's presume that Ian Coulter is totally right and that Mick Wallace is totally wrong. Let's presume that £7 million sterling was just resting in his account. Let's presume that nobody got a bribe, nobody was promised a bribe, nobody expected a bribe, and the £7 million sterling would have gone straight to the Vincent de Paul once it had rested for long enough in a secret offshore bank account. Even assuming all that was true, what the hell is NAMA doing, selling property in tranches worth €4.5 billion? The whole point of NAMA was to maximise the return, or at least minimise the loss, for the taxpayer. They should be doing everything to get the best possible price. There are only a tiny handful of investment funds that can afford to make such a gigantic investment in such a tiny market as the north of Ireland. By selling in such gigantic quantities, NAMA is excluding almost all of the potential buyers from the market. And it stands to reason that they are dramatically reducing the price that they can get for those assets. Nobody benefits from that except enormous investment funds. The taxpayer is certainly losing out hugely. Even if a bribe was never paid, even if a NAMA staff member never asked for 30 grand in 2 bags of cash, even if buyers from NAMA never flipped properties profiting millions in a couple of months, NAMA still stinks. It has stunk from day one. They are acting in a way that utterly contradicts their supposed mission of protecting taxpayers' money. The Garda Síochána simply don't have the personnel, don't have the expertise, they don't have the intellectual capacity, and they certainly don't have the motivation to do a proper criminal investigation in NAMA. But we might be in luck. This one crosses the border. That brings in the British police. And it involves the actions of a US-based firm, and that brings in the American Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that's used to prosecute US businessmen who pay bribes abroad outside the US. And the FBI have a comparatively good record of squeezing crooks where it hurts. Remember from the last podcast, Bernie Madoff got a 150-year prison sentence. That's what he got for pleading guilty. I'm guessing that the FBI and the British National Crime Agency aren't quite so worried as the Gardaí are about stepping on the toes of tin-pot crooks in our banana republic. There might be fun in this one yet.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
Klaus-Peter Wilsch is a German politician and member of the CDU, Angela Merkel's Conservative Party that's allied to Fine Gael in the European Parliament. He's a member of the German Bundestag or Parliament. He represents a constituency in the wealthy western state of Hesse for the last 17 years, and I've got him on the phone from Berlin now. Herr Wilsch, you're a member of the CDU. You're opposed from the start to the bailout for Greece. I think everybody in Ireland knows that the Germans have taken a hard line on that. What I'm wondering is, what is your policy goal?
Well, when you look back to the time when we erected the common currency, we had a settlement of rules that strictly forbid that one country takes care for the deficit of the other one, the bailout rule. And I thought back in 2010, and I think it's still, that it was a fraud to not apply this rule, but to give loans to Greece, because what we effectively did was bailing out the private creditors, taking the loans on government-based institutions, agencies.
That's to say, banks gave loans to the Greek government. The Greek government was about to default, and those banks would have gone bust. And what happened instead was that the Eurozone essentially paid off those banks and converted those loans to banks into loans to the European Central Bank.
Right. Not the central bank, but to the states. But anyway,
to individual European states, yeah.
The central bank also took some of the bonds, bought them out, and I was anxious that they would lead to some struggle between the countries, because the relationship between creditor and debtor is not always very good in real life, and so it is between states. And if you look at the pictures we saw from European capitals in the last 5 years, and if you look to the last campaign in Greece or the campaign for the referendum now, they are not really arguing on interior policies. They are campaigning against Merkel, against Schäuble, against Brussels, against Berlin.
So the campaign is a little bit unfocused.
Right.
And
right.
Okay, so let's say, and I think I perhaps would have agreed with you. You might have said at the time 5 years ago, let the banks made the loans. They did a bad business deal. Let them take the hit. But you and I would not have been listened to at that time. So where we are right now, Greece is on the verge of bankruptcy. Where do we want to get to?
I think that Greece only has a chance to get ground under their feet if they make a new start with a new currency. They should go back to the drachma, or let them call it Cyprus, or however they want the new currency. It's their decision. And they have to be able to accompany their structural reforms they have to do by their own currency policy. That means devaluation of their currency in order to make the imports more expensive.
Would that also mean default?
Kind of course. They don't have really a problem with the burden of their credits if you look at the loans that have been given by the other Eurozone countries, or if you look at the loans that have been given by the EFSF. We already prolonged those. Paying back for the intergovernmental loans does only start at 2020, and EFSF starts at 23. So we have pretty time. If they do a new start now and then we come together again, let's say 18, 19, in order to get all the donors at the table and to maybe restructure the debt, the sovereign debt. This could be a efficient way to handle it.
So in essence, you are in favour of Greece, one, leaving the euro, but also having its debt restructured, which would effectively reduce the net present value of their debt. That's essentially a bailout, essentially a default.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I think if you look at the history of defaulting states in the last 60, 70 years, there were some attempts to make it without devaluation and without restructuring of debt, but mostly all of them failed. You cannot handle this within the eurozone, or when you look at other countries, in keeping the currency exchange rate fixed to dollar or whatsoever. You have to devaluate. This is the main point. And this would, of course, lead to a point that when you look at Greece now, they are importing 25% more than they are exporting in the agricultural sector, which is kind of silly. If you look at Greece, the climate there, you take a broom.
That should be a strong export sector for them.
Pardon?
That should be a strong export sector for them, but they're not exporting, they're importing.
They're importing, right.
How do you then, Herr Wilsch, how do you then square that with the policy of your government, which seems to be to keep Greece in the euro and keep them, to try and make them pay what seem to me to be unpayable debts?
Well, I'm, as you probably are aware, I'm fighting against this. I was voting against all those bailout constructions, and this time we have been 60 in our parliamentary group of the CDU-CSU. Mm-hmm. So
that's to say, 60 members of your party voted against this.
Out of 310, yes.
Okay, Klaus-Peter Wilsch, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Make your view heard. Record your own contribution and email it to podcast@here'show.ie. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
I'm joined on the line now by John Handelar, who is behind fixmystreet.ie and behind kildarestreet.com and behind very soon foi.ie. John, are you performing a public service here?
Actually, I mean, I got into this whole thing primarily by needing to find out the answer to a question 10 years ago when I moved here, which was like, in which constituency am I? Where is the council, or if we're talking about the Dáil? And there's nowhere online I can look that up. And there wasn't at the time, and there almost still isn't. Although Com Doyle, who used to work at Facebook, has recently put whoismytd.com together, which gets very close to answering that question. That's how I got into this in the first place.
We should explain a little bit. Fixmystreet.ie is designed to report problems like potholes or whatever to the relevant local authority. KildareStreet.com, I think, basically has all the speeches made by anyone ever in the Dáil. And foi.ie, what's that going to do?
foi.ie is like everything else I'm doing, a version of a site that previously existed in some other jurisdiction that we don't have yet. And it was impossible to do until November last. And the only reason it's not open yet is because I'm doing something to Kildare Street, and there's only one of me. But basically what it does is you pitch up at foi.ie if you want to make a freedom of information request to a public body. We will maintain the directory of all the public bodies and which ones and who to send the reports to. You file a request, we deliver it for you, but we don't tell them what your email address is. We make up a brand new email request for this request that you're making. Your request has its own email address, and the reason it does that is that all replies are sent directly back to the website and automatically published.
Okay, and I was saying off air that these are lots of services that really the state should be providing, and you disagreed. Why do you disagree?
Well, I mean, specifically though, we were talking about Fix My Street, and the reason I think that Fix My Street is a bad example for something that local authorities should do is that, from a user interface point of view, and in fairness, the government has actually recognised this, because it has a thing called fixyourstreet.a, which is run by one of the councils, South Dublin specifically, but it covers the whole country, and it's been kind of blessed by the Department of Environment. But if you put this into the bailiwick of individual authorities, then what you'll wind up with is a complete nightmare of user interface disaster, like, for example, checktheregister.ie. And checktheregister.ie is the website we have in Ireland where you're supposed to be able to find out whether you're on the electoral roll or not. Mm-hmm. But what checktheregister.ie is a single page, and it asks you only one question. It says, which local authority are you in? And then it refers you off to one of 26 different copies of the same app, one at each council. You
don't get the impression that these are too IT savvy, do you?
Well, it sort of flows automatically from the idea that you devolve the app to the council level. How can you, if the councils are running the electoral registers, then how can you not have it that way? Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the problem with that, and it may be okay to do that to checking the electoral register. I mean, I don't think it is, but there are degrees of bad. But degrees of bad become spectacular degrees of bad when it comes to Fix My Street. I don't want 26 Fix My Streets, and I don't want, if I'm walking around on the phone somewhere in County Dublin, why should I even have to know which council I'm standing in right now when all I'm trying to do is help you out and tell you that this street lamp is broken?
Mm-hmm. And tell me about your struggles with KildareStreet.com. I know it was offline for a while.
It was because, basically the staff at Leinster House took umbrage to Kildare Street, and when they were replacing their transcription and web publishing system for their transcripts, they deliberately removed their previously extant facility that published everything, the current version, and the keywords there are current version of yesterday's transcript online in a structured data format, and they stopped publishing structured data as a project altogether.
For someone who mightn't be so IT savvy, what is structured data exactly?
It's a version of the text that is designed primarily to be read by computers and not by people. Mm-hmm. In this case, it was a wacky but nonetheless moderately predictable form of XML. So instead of something that you can read or something that's formatted for print or for web pages, it's like if you do view source on a web page, and things that are links are wrapped in A tags, and things that are headlines are wrapped in H1 or H2 or H3 or etc.
So in other words, the text could be analysed by a computer and represented and searched and so forth.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that form of they used to publish simultaneously their web pages and the XML from which those web pages were derived. And so that allowed other people, specifically me in this case, to use the XML. And then they decided not to do that anymore. And the reason they decided not to do it is because I used to complain about how the XML was often malformatted.
I'm interested in what you do, and the reason I got you on the podcast was because I think you're doing the right thing, but and I think your attitude that independent developers should be able to develop systems that lead to good governance, I think that's a good idea. But do you think, and my opinion is, and I'm going to ask you if you agree, that the government should be required in pretty much every case, for everything it does, to publish all the raw data and let you or me or anybody else build an app or a website to sit on top of that data and present it in any useful way possible?
Well, I mean, in principle, yes. I mean, in practice, there are probably exceptions to that, although I know in my gut that there are going to be exceptions to that as a principle, because it's going to be either quicker or less cost inefficient for some things.
Sure, but for large scale data.
I mean, I think that, let's take Fix My Street as an example. It should be possible. But Dublin City Council has a thing on its website, for example, that allows you to report allows you to report something that you could use Fix My Street to report. Dublin City Council thing requires you to hand over your email address, your home address, postal address, your telephone number, your mobile number, your inside leg measurement, and blah, 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 blah. And it's a 5-page wizard with a very slow server behind it. So actually filing that report requires you hitting next several times and providing way more information than is required. And I think the most important thing to understand, and it applies to a lot of things when you're trying to talk as a person to the government as an entity, the fact that that's very difficult to complete is not an accident. It is, in fact, the primary design goal of that form. The primary design goal of that form is to prevent you from finishing it. The primary design goal of the way that we in Ireland allow people to comment on planning applications is to prevent you from making comments on planning applications. You can't do it online. You can't. The only place they publish lists of things that might be happening in your immediate area is you're required to put a piece of paper up somewhere on the premises where you want to do some development, and then the council will run a very small advert in completely opaque language on page 75 of a local newspaper you don't read. And then even if you manage to jump through all those hurdles, then you have to phone them up and find out where you're going to send your comment about a planning application to. And then, if you haven't given them €20, they won't read it.
Tell me, John, can you think of any other, shall we say, obstructions to citizen participation that need to be overcome?
Well, I mean, we mentioned Check the Register a little while ago. Registering to vote in this country, if you aren't.
Yeah, I can sign up for broadband. I can sign up for a broadband online. I can get my new mobile phone online. I can do a whole host of things online, but I can't register to vote online.
Well, I mean, it's worse than that in Ireland, though. I mean, if in the UK, if I'm not on the electoral register, I can ask the council to send me a form, and then I'll send it back to them. In Ireland, if they don't send you a form, and you have to ask for one, then they won't take that form back unless you walk it into a Garda station with photographic proof of ID and get a guard to sign it. And then they'll put you on the supplemental register. We don't just have bad electoral registration. We have a voter registration system which is designed to prevent people from registering. It's not an accident. It's the purpose of the process.
John,
they can remove you from the electoral register way more easily than you can get yourself back on it.
John, I think you're right about an awful lot of the difficulties with citizens engaging with government, but you've done an awful lot of work to try and improve that. Thank you very much, and thank you for talking to me.
Okay, thanks.
Never miss a show. Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
Atlantic Philanthropies is an organisation funded by the Irish-American billionaire Chuck Feeney. It has supported a wide range of causes in Ireland, typically promoting education and social reform. It drew some comment recently for its support of Glen, the Gay and Lesbian Equality Network. Some on the no side in the referendum characterised this as interference in the democratic process. Michael Moriarty is involved with various projects funded by Atlantic Philanthropies, and he wrote in a piece recently that monetary support of civil society is a legitimate part of our democratic process. Why is that the case, Michael?
I suppose, just to give a bit of background first, I carried out research. It was part of a master's in social justice and public policy, but I carried out research about the impact of philanthropy in Ireland in recent years. And I suppose we've really had a boom over the last 10 years or so in philanthropy in Ireland. Atlantic has given more money in Ireland than any other outside agency. at the same time, the One Foundation gave a large amount of money. The One Foundation is connected with Declan Ryan. Would have been given a large amount of money to Irish charities, also to charities in Vietnam. And before that, there were other charities like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, other philanthropy, like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, that were giving significant support as well. And the other context is that while this has been happening for about 10 years or so, particularly the funding from Atlantic and the One Foundation, it's now ending. So we're coming into a period of time where the charities and causes funded by this big money philanthropies are going, and it doesn't look like there's going to be a replacement. So just to say about the research I carried out, what it showed is that of the money, philanthropic money going into the charity sector in Ireland is very large. But still, even with this philanthropic money, it makes only less than 2%, even during these boom times, less than 2% of the money going into the charity sector generally. Most of the money, about 60%, comes from the state to the charity sector, and the vast majority of the remaining ones comes from public donations from people like you or me.
Sure. But if you're to see charities, and charities can have a broad remit, some of them have a much greater focus on social change than others. If one very wealthy philanthropist, particularly one who doesn't even live in the country, is focused on a particular agenda, they can have, really quite a large effect, can't they?
Yeah. And I suppose this is what my research showed is when you take a look at where the philanthropic money is going. Okay, Atlantic has made major investment in education and capital spending in education in Ireland, but if you look at charities that are focused on social change, those who spend their time doing advocacy campaigns, whether that's public advocacy or advocacy focus of politicians, these organisations tended to get a much larger percentages of support from Atlantic Philanthropy, One Foundation, and the likes of the Joseph Rowntree Trust.
Sorry, just to decode that a little bit. Essentially, that's what that is saying, is that where there are people who have access to Leinster House, who are able to take ministers for cups of coffee or whatever, those type of charities tend to have a very high proportion of their bills paid for by a very small number of individuals.
They've been getting large grants, yes.
Yeah, and isn't it the case that the no side in the referendum, and I know Iona Institute have said this, that if you have one individual or a very small handful of individuals, particularly if they don't even live in the country, influencing policy in that way, isn't that suspect?
I don't think so. I mean, the first thing is the organisations themselves, the likes of Glen, are based in Ireland. They're registered in Ireland. They're regulated by the charities regulator, and any campaigning activities, any referendum campaigning activities are monitored by the Standards and Public Office Commission.
Sure, but it doesn't take a genius to work out that if Atlantic Philanthropies pays their office bills, they can then use the money that they would have had to pay their office bill with for campaigning in the referendum. Well,
I mean, the support from Atlantic and others allows groups like Glen to operate, it enhances the impact that they can have. These organisations can hire more staff, can deploy more resources in their campaigning. But really, what we've seen Atlantic and One Foundation and Rowntree and others do, they're supporting minority causes. They're supporting groups like the LGBT community, groups like travelling community, minority causes that may not otherwise have large support.
That's probably correct, and it's reasonable to say that from kind of a liberal modernizing point of view, that these philanthropies are supporting the good guys. But if that principle is established, what is there to stop, for example, the Koch brothers or Esso or Exxon to fund organizations to campaign, for example, against environmental protection?
They can, and I don't know to what extent that does happen. I suppose the way politics works in Ireland and in most democratic countries, money alone can't make things happen. It can help, and it is part of the process. But, if you look particularly at the marriage equality campaign, sure, the support from Atlantic and others helped to put these things on the agenda. But we wouldn't, if you looked at the referendum themselves and the campaign leading up to the referendum, you saw thousands, tens of thousands of volunteers around the country. You saw fundraising going on at a grassroots level. And I suppose during my research, I met with both people working in the philanthropies and people working in the civil society organisations, the charities that were funded by them. What they were saying is that basically you do need a mix in order to succeed. This funding is certainly an enabler, but you need the grassroots to drive campaigns, and you need politicians who are open to these ideas as well. So it's not just money isn't the sole or even the dominant factor.
That's fair enough. Money, especially money from philanthropists, is not necessarily the only thing you need. But it sure helps, and it is likely that causes supported by billionaires are going to get a better hearing than causes that aren't supported by billionaires.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, those resources do help, and I suppose.
No, but isn't that a breach of the fundamental democratic process? Foreign billionaires who would not be entitled to vote in Ireland can have an enormous impact on social policy. Clearly, vastly out of proportion to their democratic rights.
I mean, and I suppose this is one of the things I was writing in the Irish Times. I mean, the democratic process isn't just us 4 million or so Irish citizens, each with one equal vote, debating in a vacuum. Our democratic process is shaped by lots of factors, and there's cultural and societal institutions out there that shape them. So, we have, and absolutely civil society and NGOs and the funding they receive is part of that. But there's other cultural bodies out there. So it's not just this idea that...
For example?
You have the church, you have other NGOs, you have businesses, and you have industry lobbies. I mean, if you look at an issue like alcohol policy and how we discuss alcohol policy, that is influenced. There is a small number of charities that are involved in it. They're generally poorly funded. And then that debate gets influenced by large amount of money coming from the alcohol industry, who also fund NGOs in Ireland they do fund NGOs in Ireland to push the debate according to their interests.
So the slogan that they use, of course, is drink sensibly, which, if you reduce it down, is drink because they want people to drink. And I take that point, but isn't our democracy being built on a very narrow basis? If we say, in order to combat the effects of, for example, drink industry funding, we need to get funding from some billionaire and hope that some billionaire somewhere will be interested enough to pay a few million for a campaign to counteract the campaigns of the billions from the drink industry. Wouldn't it be better to say, hang on a second, if you're not an Irish citizen, you shouldn't be funding political campaigns within Ireland, and in any case, shouldn't we limit the amount of funding to what an ordinary person could contribute?
Well, we can limit, and we do limit what's spent in elections themselves. But outside of elections, we don't, and I think that's what you're referring to. I think one other thing that is useful to say, that there's something starting, there's a new lobbying act that's coming into place in September, so anyone, whether they're from the drinks industry or an organisation funded by Atlantic Philanthropies, they'll have to record their interactions with politicians and senior servants, and that will be widely available. And I think that's a step forward for transparency for all of these matters. But just to go back, I mean, I'd encourage people to get involved with causes that they're involved in, to donate, to volunteer. There's great groups out there, like if you look at just to pick one example, the Irish Penal Reform Trust. They don't accept any state funding. They advocate on behalf of, I suppose, a very unpopular group. They're advocating for the rights of Irish prisoners. So they don't get a lot of volunteers, that they don't get a lot of funding in order to maintain their neutrality from the state, and because they challenge the state in a lot of what they do, taking actions on behalf of human rights, on behalf of prisoners, they don't accept state funding themselves. So they do need support, but it's very difficult for them to get it. So a group like Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who are a UK-based organisation, have been supporting their work for years and have been having a great impact through that support. But Rowntree, like Atlantic and the One Foundation, are stopping their Irish operations in the very near future, and that's going to be funding that's been cut off.
Michael Moriarty, thank you very much for joining me.
Okay, thank you.
If you like the Here's How podcast, please rate and review the show on iTunes and other podcast providers. Share it on Facebook and Twitter. Tell your friends. But most of all, make your views heard. Call us on 076 603 5060.
Nicholas Zolter is a PhD candidate in European law at the University of Hamburg, and he's also the economic spokesperson for the CDU's youth wing called Junge Union. Nicholas, what is the CDU and the German government? What is their policy aim with Greece?
Hello, and thank you for having me. First of all, let me say on behalf of Junge Union that we are glad to have a conservative German government in these troubled days for Europe. I think the major goal is stability and long-term solutions. That's what we're trying to achieve, even though, of course, at the European stage, you always need to make some compromise.
And as to the exact policy instruments, what do you think is bringing more stability? I'm looking at the streets of Athens. They don't seem so stable at the moment.
No, you're correct. I mean, of course, we have a very difficult situation at this very moment. And I think if we are honest to ourselves, we need to admit that no one has the whole picture. I mean, no one knows all the facts. But I think long-term stability can only be achieved by clear rules and by also taking these rules seriously. So I think the major goal of the German government is and should be that we offer financial assistance, but only on clear conditions, and that we also make sure that these conditions are being fulfilled.
So do you think it's feasible to enforce the repayment schedule that Greece is currently signed up to?
I think this will be hard. It will be hard to tell the public in Europe and other European states to do so. I also think that there are legal obstacles for a member state of the Eurozone. It's not easy. There is no big scope of restructuring debt. Also, we have to see that there was already quite a lot of financial assistance to the Greek government. So I think the priority of the negotiations at the moment should be the reforms that need to be implemented, not so much talking about what is to be paid back at the end.
At the moment, it seems like Angela Merkel and the German government are almost enjoying the pain of that they're inflicting on Greece, that they perhaps are so resentful of the Syriza government that they are wishing it to fail.
Well, I think it's a fair point to say that there have been certain expressions also of German politicians that were not very diplomatic. I agree. But I don't think it's about enjoying giving Greece a hard time. I mean, there has already been a lot of financial assistance. Other countries also gained financial assistance, but they were willing to implement reforms, and they did implement reforms. I mean, so did Ireland, and now these countries are comparably well off. So it's also a question of having the same rules for every member state. I'm sure that there are or were personal obstacles. I mean, we are glad that Mr. Varoufakis has resigned by now. But I think looking at our government, looking at Angela Merkel and Wolfgang Schäuble, if we see what they are facing with this very far left-winged Greek government, they are very diplomatic and professional, and I think we should be glad to have them.
Isn't it a case that the real fault lies with the PASOK and with the New Democracy, the equivalent of the Christian Democrats in Greece? They were the parties that spent Greece into this problem in the first place.
Well, definitely. I think there have been mistakes made from many parties. I'm sure there are also mistakes in the first measures the EU, also Germany, undertook. I mean, we can always analyze what were the reasons for this crisis. But I think right now we need to be pragmatic. We need to see what we are facing. We are facing a Greek government that, let me put it this way, that is highly problematic when it comes to negotiation, but also to implementing reforms. So yes, of course, we must be honest about the past. But we should see what are the partners we are facing now.
Mm-hmm. That's a reasonable point, and you emphasize that Syriza is a far-left government. The third largest party in the Greek parliament is Golden Dawn. They're an explicitly neo-Nazi party. They fly a flag that's clearly inspired by the German swastika flag. One of their MPs was a singer in a neo-Nazi punk band that had songs with the title Auschwitz and lyrics that said Juden raus in German, Jews out. Another of their MPs has the words Sieg Heil tattooed on his arm in German. Another MP again has a swastika tattoo. Do you not have any fear that if you push the humanitarian crisis in Greece too far, that you will be faced with even more extremism?
I think all politicians of CDU see that point, and not only implications to the negotiations on the debt crisis, but also implications that influence foreign policy. I mean, we see very close ties to Russia. Russia has a rather right-winged government at the moment and faces many nationalist movements itself. Well, of course, you always have the risk when you demand too much. That there is extremism. I mean, Syriza itself is an extremist party. But I think we are beyond this border by now. And I think the reforms that are being asked are highly reasonable. We have other member states that implemented comparable reforms. And
hang on a second. Are you sure those reforms are comparable? For example, 25% of the public sector workers in Greece have been fired. Nothing comparable to that has happened in any other EU country.
Yes, but at the same time, there are a lot of public assets the Greek government could make use of. I mean, we didn't have this situation in the Baltic states. We didn't have this situation in Portugal. I mean, there are many problems when you want to get the public sector smaller, but in the Greek case, there are also opportunities. There are values, there are assets, and I think this could also be interesting for investors, for private investors coming to Greece. I mean, we just see for Ireland right now that I think it was the Forbes magazine that you've been awarded the most attractive destination for foreign investment. So you can always turn the tide, of course, at a certain cost. I think if we're honest, we need to tell the Greek people that it will be a very hard time they will be facing. I know that sounds harsh, but the position of the Union is that we need to make long-term solutions. And I think at the moment we see a lot of actors that tend to seek short-term solution at the expense of long-term stability. And that's not the way we should go.
One final question, Nicholas. One of Greece's problems being in the euro is that as their economy declines, their currency doesn't devalue, so their exports don't get cheaper. But the reverse is true as well, that if a country's economy goes very well, their currency goes up in value, appreciates, the price of their exports appreciate, and this limits their economic growth. Isn't Germany in a very fortunate position that its economy is going very strongly, but the currency that it sells its products is being kept down by the economic troubles in the Mediterranean area? Germany's making a lot of money out of this crisis, isn't it?
Well, the German government might be making a lot of money, probably.
The German economy
interest rates also. But no, let me be clear on this. If you look at the policy of the ECB, it's a very important factor in this whole crisis. It's a policy of low interest rates. Okay. And if you look at the savings,
but focus on the question I asked. The German economy
That's
is
not true. The German taxpayer is paying a lot, and especially the German saver is paying a lot. I mean, people aren't getting any interest rates, and that's a big problem because people saved a lot of money, whereas in Greece and also in Italy, people invested in houses, they invested in assets, and that's also the truth.
But the German economy is doing better than it would without this crisis.
Yes, I agree. I give you that.
So the regular German citizen is making quite a lot of money out of this.
Well, I wouldn't be sure because, I mean, if I look at my relatives, my parents, for example, I mean, they saved some money and now they don't see any interest rates. That's a big problem. It's a big problem, and it's a problem that is not seen at all. But I agree, of course, the German economy does quite well. We pay very low interest rates for public debt. I totally agree on that.
German exporters can sell with a very depressed currency.
Yeah, yes, definitely, I give you that. But that was not the aim of this whole policy. The aim was to help Greece.
Nicholas Coulter, the economic spokesperson for the CDU's Youth Wing Young Union, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you very much.
Make your view heard. Dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
That's almost the end of episode 10 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on the 30th of July 2015. References for everything that I mentioned in the show are listed in this episode's page on the here'show.ie website. If you like the podcast, please go on iTunes and write a nice review. Also, please like the show on Facebook, please follow @Here's How Podcast on Twitter, and of course, subscribe to the show. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. You can do all of that right from www.here'show.ie. Or you could just go out and brave the wind and the rain of August in Ireland and try and find some people who are still alive and tell them how great the podcast is. The next show will be uploaded shortly. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.